The smell of wood smoke and manure filled Quinn Garrison's nostrils as he rode into Truth or Consequences on a blistering afternoon in July 1884, his horse tired and his own stomach growling something fierce. He had been driving cattle from Texas to Colorado for the better part of 3 months, and this dusty New Mexico town was supposed to be nothing more than a place to rest his bones and refill his saddlebags before the final push north. What he did not expect was to find a woman sitting in the narrow alley between the general store and the saloon, her back pressed against weathered wooden planks, carefully tearing a single piece of bread into tiny portions as though it were the last meal she would ever see. Quinn pulled his horse to a stop, squinting through the afternoon glare. The woman looked to be in her early 20s, same as him, with dark hair that had come loose from its pins and hung in tangled waves around a face that might have been pretty if it were not so hollow with hunger. Her dress, once a respectable blue calico, was faded and torn at the hem, covered in the kind of dust that comes from days on the road. She did not notice him at first, too focused on her careful rationing, placing one tiny morsel on her tongue and closing her eyes as if committing the taste to memory. Something twisted in Quinn's chest, a mixture of anger and sadness that anyone should have to measure out breadcrumbs like gold dust. He dismounted slowly, not wanting to startle her, and cleared his throat. The woman's eyes flew open, wide and startled, the color of dark amber in the harsh sunlight. She clutched the remaining bread to her chest protectively. "I did not mean to frighten you, miss," Quinn said, keeping his voice gentle and removing his hat. His sandy hair was plastered to his forehead with sweat. "I just rode in and could not help but notice you sitting here. Are you all right?" The woman's jaw tightened, and Quinn saw pride flash across her features despite the obvious hunger. "I am fine, thank you. Just resting in the shade." Quinn looked pointedly at the bread in her hand, then back at her face. "When did you last have a proper meal?" "That is none of your concern, cowboy." Her voice was stronger than her appearance suggested, educated too, which made Quinn wonder what series of misfortunes had brought her to this desperate state. "Maybe not," Quinn agreed, "but I'm about to walk into that restaurant yonder and order myself the biggest steak they have got, along with potatoes and whatever else they are serving. Seems a shame to eat alone." "I cannot pay you back," she said quietly, and the admission seemed to cost her something. "Did I ask you to?" Quinn held out his hand. "Quinn Garrison, late of Austin and currently driving cattle to Colorado. And you are?" The woman hesitated, then slowly reached out to take his hand. Her fingers were thin and cold despite the heat. "Nora Ashford, late of Boston, currently of nowhere in particular." Quinn felt a spark travel up his arm at her touch, something he had no time to examine properly. He pulled her to her feet, noting how she swayed slightly before steadying herself. "Well, Miss Ashford, let us get some food in you before you fall over. My horse can wait a bit longer for his oats, and so can I for my journey." The restaurant was a simple affair, attached to the town's only hotel, with a handful of tables and a proprietor who eyed Nora's disheveled state with suspicion until Quinn laid a silver dollar on the counter. They sat by a window that looked out onto the main street, and Quinn ordered enough food for 3 people without consulting the menu. Nora sat rigidly in her chair, her hands folded in her lap. "You do not have to do this." "I know," Quinn said simply, "but I am going to anyway." When the food arrived, plates heaping with beefsteak, fried potatoes, beans, cornbread, and even a slice of apple pie, Quinn saw Nora's composure nearly crumble. She looked at the meal, as though she could not quite believe it was real, then glanced at him with something like gratitude and suspicion mixed together. "Go on," he encouraged, "before it gets cold." Nora picked up her fork with a trembling hand and took a small, careful bite. Quinn watched as her eyes closed, savoring it the same way she had savored that piece of bread. Then hunger overcame dignity, and she began to eat in earnest, though still with more manners than most cowhands he knew. Quinn ate his own meal more slowly, finding himself less interested in the food than in the mystery of the woman sitting across from him. Between bites, the story came out in fits and starts. Nora had come west 6 months ago with her father, a school teacher who had been promised a position in Santa Fe. They had made it as far as truth or consequences when he fell ill with pneumonia. He died 2 weeks later, leaving Nora alone with barely enough money for his burial and nothing for her passage back east. She had been trying to find work, any kind of work, but respectable positions for single women were scarce in a town this size, and the less respectable ones were not options she would consider. "I have been sleeping in the church basement," she admitted, pushing her fork through the last of her potatoes. "The Reverend is kind, but I can tell his wife wants me gone. I have been looking for a way to earn money, but everything requires either skills I do not have or a man's strength I cannot match." Quinn leaned back in his chair, studying her. There was something about Nora Ashford that called to him. Something beyond just the basic human decency of not letting someone starve. She had intelligence in her eyes and steel in her spine, even bent by hunger and hardship. "Can you cook?" "Yes," Nora said. "My mother made sure I learned all the domestic arts. I can sew, keep accounts, manage a household. In Boston, those skills were supposed to help me find a good husband." She laughed bitterly. "Out here, they seem to be worth less than the ability to rope a steer." An idea was forming in Quinn's mind. Crazy and impulsive, and probably unwise. He had always been too quick to act on instinct, which had gotten him in trouble more than once, but it had also saved his life on occasion. "The cattle outfit I'm riding with, we have got a camp about 5 miles north of town. 20 men who have been eating trail food for months. The cook we had quit 2 weeks back after the trail boss accused him of watering down the coffee. Since then, we have been taking turns over the fire, and I can tell you truthfully, most cowboys cannot cook worth a damn." Nora looked up sharply, hope kindling in her eyes. "Are you offering me a position?" "I cannot promise it will be easy," Quinn warned. "Cowboys are rough men, and you would be the only woman in camp. But the trail boss, Tom Sanders, he is fair, and he keeps order. Any man who stepped out of line would answer to him and to me. The pay would not be much, but you would have 3 meals a day and a safe place to sleep until we reach Colorado. After that, there are towns up there bigger than this one, with more opportunities." "Why would you do this for me?" Nora asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "You do not know me at all." Quinn met her eyes steadily. "Maybe not. But I know what it is like to be down on your luck with nobody willing to give you a chance. When I was 16, I lost my parents to fever. Would have starved myself if a rancher named John Garrett had not taken me on. Taught me everything about working cattle. He said once that the measure of a man is what he does when he has got the power to help someone and nothing to gain from it. I have been thinking about those words a lot lately." Nora was quiet for a long moment, her eyes searching his face as if looking for the trick, the hidden cost. Finally, she nodded. "I accept. And Mr. Garrison, I will work harder than any cook you have ever had. You will not regret this." "Call me Quinn," he said, feeling a smile tug at his lips for the first time in days. "And I do not think I will regret it at all." They left town an hour later after Quinn had paid for Nora to have a hot bath at the hotel and bought her some supplies from the general store. A split riding skirt, a sturdy blouse, boots that actually fit, and a wide-brimmed hat to keep the sun off her face. He also loaded up a pack horse with cooking supplies and food stores, knowing that Tom would grumble about the expense but ultimately appreciate having decent meals again. Nora sat astride a gentle mare that Quinn rented from the livery stable, and he could tell she had ridden before, though probably in a far more ladylike fashion than the current situation demanded. As they rode north into the desert scrubland, she sat straighter than she had in town, the defeated slump gone from her shoulders. "Tell me about your trail boss," she said as they navigated around a stand of juniper trees. "What should I expect?" Quinn considered this. "Tom Sanders is pushing 50, been driving cattle since before I was born. He is tough but fair, like I said. Does not tolerate laziness or dishonesty, but he looks after his men. Lost his wife and daughter to cholera about 10 years back, and I think that made him harder in some ways, softer in others. He might give you a suspicious look at first, but if you prove yourself, he will have your back." "And the other men?" "They are cowboys," Quinn said with a shrug. Most of them are good fellows, just rough around the edges. We have got a couple of older hands who have been doing this for decades, some younger ones like me who are still learning, and one kid who just turned 18 and thinks he is tougher than he is. They will likely be surprised to see you, might make some jokes, but Tom will shut that down quick if it gets out of hand. And you? Nora asked, glancing at him. What is your story, Quinn Garrison? Quinn shifted in his saddle, not used to talking about himself. Not much to tell. Been cowboying since I was 16, like I mentioned. Worked on a few different ranches in Texas before signing on for this drive. I am good with horses, decent with a rope, and I can shoot straight when I need to. Been saving my money, thinking maybe one day I will have my own spread. Nothing big, just enough to run a small herd and maybe raise some horses. That sounds like a good dream, Nora said softly. Land of your own, answering to nobody. What about you? What were you dreaming about before all this happened? Nora was quiet for so long that Quinn thought she might not answer. When she finally spoke, her voice was wistful. I wanted to teach, like my father. I love books, love learning, and I thought I could help children discover that same love. In Boston, they do not let women teach in the boys' schools, and the girls' academies pay next to nothing, but my father told me that in the West, they were so desperate for teachers that they did not care if you were a man or a woman. He was so excited about his position in Santa Fe, about the opportunity to build something new. I think that excitement is what got him through the worst of the journey. When he died, it felt like that dream died with him. Maybe it does not have to, always, Quinn said. Colorado has mining towns popping up every month, and every one of them needs schools. You get up there with some money in your pocket and experience under your belt, you could still teach. Maybe, Nora agreed, but she did not sound convinced. The cattle camp came into view as the sun began its descent toward the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink that made the desert look almost beautiful. The camp was a semi-permanent setup, with the herd grazing nearby under the watchful eyes of a couple of riders. There were bedrolls arranged around a cold fire pit, a chuck wagon that looked like it had seen better days, and a rope corral holding the spare horses. As Quinn and Nora rode in, men looked up from whatever tasks they were engaged in, their expressions ranging from curious to shocked. Tom Sanders emerged from near the chuck wagon, a tall man with graying hair and a weather-beaten face that could have been carved from leather. He looked at Quinn, then at Nora, then back at Quinn with his eyebrows raised. You going to explain this, Garrison? Quinn dismounted and helped Nora down, noting how she stood tall despite the stairs. Tom, this is Nora Ashford. She is a cook, and a good one from what I hear. I hired her on to replace Jenkins. You hired her? Tom repeated slowly. You do realize we are in the middle of driving 2,000 head of cattle across some of the roughest country in New Mexico, and you brought us a woman? I brought you a cook who can actually make food worth eating, Quinn corrected, and she needed work. Seemed like a fair trade to me. Tom studied Nora for a long moment, and Quinn held his breath. If the trail boss refused to let her stay, he would have to ride her back to town and probably lose his own position for insubordination. But finally, Tom's expression softened just a fraction. Can you really cook, girl? Yes, sir, Nora said firmly, meeting his gaze without flinching. And I am a hard worker. I will earn my keep. See that you do, Tom said gruffly. I will pay you $2 a week plus your meals, same as we were paying Jenkins. You sleep in the chuck wagon, and if any of these men bother you, you come straight to me, understand? Yes, sir, Nora said again, and Quinn saw her shoulders relax slightly. Tom turned to the men who had gathered around. This is Nora Ashford, our new cook. I expect you all to treat her with respect and keep your distance unless she asks for help with something. First man who forgets that will be walking to Colorado. We clear? There was a chorus of, yes, boss, and sure thing, Tom, and the men dispersed back to their tasks, though Quinn caught more than a few curious glances thrown Nora's way. He helped her unload the supplies and get oriented with the chuck wagon, which was a disaster of dirty pans and scattered provisions. Lord have mercy, Nora muttered, looking at the chaos. How have you men not poisoned yourselves? Luck, mostly, Quinn admitted. Jenkins might have been a terrible cook, but at least he kept things organized. Nora rolled up her sleeves, and Quinn saw determination settle over her features. Well, we cannot do anything about dinner tonight. It is too late to start something proper. But I can make biscuits and warm up some beans, maybe fry some salt pork. Tomorrow I will do a proper inventory and plan out meals for the week. She worked with efficient purpose, and Quinn found himself staying nearby, ostensibly to help, but really just watching her move around the small space. Other men drifted over as the smell of biscuits baking in the Dutch oven filled the air, their initial wariness giving way to cautious interest. An older cowhand named Pete approached, hat in hand. "Begging your pardon, miss, but is there anything we can do to help? Fetch water, maybe?" "That would be wonderful, thank you," Nora said with a smile that made Pete light up like he had been given a gold nugget. By the time she served dinner, the men were lined up eagerly with their tin plates. The meal was simple, but the biscuits were fluffy and golden. The beans had been seasoned properly, and the salt pork was crispy instead of burnt or raw. Quinn watched as his fellow cowboys ate with genuine appreciation, several of them coming back for seconds. "Best biscuits I have had since leaving my mama's kitchen," declared young Danny, the 18-year-old kid, and there was a general murmur of agreement. After dinner, as the men settled around the campfire with their coffee, Tom pulled Quinn aside. "That was a risk you took, bringing her here without asking me first." "I know," Quinn said. "I'm sorry for overstepping. But Tom, she was starving in an alley, rationing breadcrumbs. I could not just ride away from that." Tom was quiet for a moment, his eyes drifting to where Nora was scrubbing out the cooking pots with fierce concentration. "No, I suppose you could not. You are a good man, Quinn Garrison. Your father would have been proud of the way you turned out." "You knew my father?" Quinn asked, surprised. "Met him once years ago at a cattle auction in San Antonio. He talked about his son, about how you were going to be something special. I think maybe he was right." Tom clapped Quinn on the shoulder and walked away, leaving Quinn to wonder at the strange turns life could take. Quinn made his way over to where Nora was finishing the washing up, the firelight casting warm shadows across her face. "You did good today. The men are already half in love with you just for those biscuits." "They were desperate," Nora said, but she looked pleased. "And hungry. Not hard to impress under those circumstances." "Still, you did what you promised. You earned your place here." Quinn hesitated, then added, "I'm going to be riding night watch in a couple hours, but I wanted to make sure you were settled first. You need anything?" "I am fine," Nora assured him. "Quinn, I just wanted to say thank you again, for everything. You saved my life today, quite literally." "You do not have to keep thanking me," Quinn said, feeling heat creep up his neck. "Just doing what is right." "That is what makes it worth thanking you for," Nora said softly, and when her eyes met his, Quinn felt that spark again, stronger this time. Over the next week, a routine developed. A routine. Nora proved to be everything she had promised and more, transforming their meals from barely edible to genuinely good. She baked bread, made stews that actually had flavor, even managed to create a passable dessert using dried apples and molasses. The men's initial wariness transformed into protective respect, and Quinn noticed how they started doing small things to help her without being asked, chopping extra firewood, hauling water, even cleaning up their language when she was around. Quinn found himself drawn to the chuck wagon area more than was strictly necessary, inventing reasons to check on supplies or offer assistance. Nora seemed to welcome his presence, and they fell into easy conversation during the quiet moments between meals. She told him about growing up in Boston, about the books she had read, and the dreams she had harbored. He told her about life on the range, about the satisfaction of good, honest work under an open sky. "Do you ever miss having a home?" Nora asked one evening as they sat near the fire after dinner, the rest of the men having dispersed to their various duties. "Someplace permanent where you are not always moving on to the next job?" "All the time," Quinn admitted. "But I also love this life, the freedom of it. Maybe that makes me contrary. Or maybe it just makes you human," Nora said. "We all want contradictory things sometimes, safety and adventure, roots and wings." "That is pretty," Quinn said. You come up with that yourself? No, I read it in a book once, cannot remember which one. Nora smiled ruefully. I had to leave all my books behind when we came west. Could not afford the extra weight on the wagon. I missed them terribly. What was your favorite? Quinn asked. Jane Eyre, Nora said without hesitation. The story of a woman who refuses to compromise her principles even when it costs her everything. She endures hardship and finds her strength, and in the end, love finds her anyway. I must have read it a dozen times. Sounds like someone else I know, Quinn said quietly. Nora looked at him sharply. I am not that strong. If you had not come along, I do not know what would have become of me. But you did not give up, Quinn pointed out. You did not turn to stealing or begging or selling yourself. You held on to your dignity even when you had nothing else. That takes strength, Nora. She was quiet for a long moment, then reached out and squeezed his hand briefly. Thank you for seeing me that way. Quinn's hand felt warm where she had touched it, and he found himself wanting to reach for her again, to pull her close, and promise that he would always see her that way. But it was too soon, too complicated, and he had nothing to offer her but a cowboy's wages and uncertain future. So instead, he just smiled and said, "Somebody should." The drive continued north, the landscape gradually changing from desert scrub to high plains grassland. They passed through small settlements and avoided others that had reputations for trouble. The work was hard and the days were long, but the herd was healthy, and they were making good time. Tom seemed pleased, and the men's spirits were high, helped no doubt by Nora's cooking and her cheerful presence. Quinn started teaching Nora to rope during the quiet afternoon hours when she had finished her preparations for the evening meal. She was a quick study, her movements becoming more confident with each attempt. They laughed together when she missed, celebrated when she succeeded, and Quinn found himself treasuring these moments more than he wanted to examine too closely. You are a good teacher, Nora told him one day, as she finally managed to lasso the fence post they had been using as a target. Patient. My father used to say that patience was the rarest virtue. Your father sounds like he was a wise man, Quinn said. He was, Nora agreed, her expression growing distant. I still miss him every day. He would have liked you, I think. He always said you could judge a man's character by how he treated those who could do nothing for him. Seems like your father and John Garrett would have gotten along, Quinn observed. Tell me more about him, Nora said, coiling the rope. The rancher who gave you your start. So Quinn told her about John Garrett, the gruff cattleman who had found a grieving teenage boy trying to steal food from his storehouse, and instead of calling the sheriff, had offered him a job. John had taught Quinn everything he knew about horses and cattle, about reading the land and the weather, about being a man of his word. He had died 3 years ago, leaving his ranch to a distant cousin, and Quinn had decided it was time to see more of the country. He sounds like a good man, Nora said. You have been blessed to know people like that. I have been thinking, Quinn said carefully, about what happens when we reach Colorado. Tom has connections with some of the mining operations up there. Might be able to get me on with an outfit that needs men year-round. Steady work, decent pay, and those mining towns, like I said before, they need teachers. Are you suggesting we stay near each other? Nora asked, her voice carefully neutral. I guess I am, Quinn said, feeling his heart hammer in his chest. These past weeks, getting to know you, it has been good. Real good. I'm not saying anything has to happen or change, but I would like to keep seeing you, if you are amenable to that. Nora was quiet, and Quinn felt his stomach drop, certain he had overstepped. But then she smiled, soft and genuine. I would like that too, Quinn, very much. Relief and joy flooded through him in equal measure, and he grinned like a fool. Yeah? Yeah, she confirmed, and the way she looked at him made Quinn feel like he could take on the whole world and come out winning. That night, as Quinn rode his watch around the herd, he found himself thinking about the future in a way he never had before. Always before, his plans had been solitary. Save money, buy land, build something for himself. Now his imagination kept adding another person to those plans, a woman with dark hair and amber eyes who could make biscuits that melted in your mouth, and whose smile made the whole desert seem less harsh. It scared him a little, how quickly she had become important to him, but it also felt right in a way nothing else ever had. Quinn had always trusted his instincts, and his instincts were telling him that Nora Ashford was someone worth building a life around. The drive continued, and with each passing day, Quinn and Nora grew closer. They still maintained propriety in front of the other men, but there were stolen moments, a touch that lingered, a shared glance across the fire, conversations that stretched late into the evening. The other cowboys noticed, of course, but nobody said anything. Even Pete, who Quinn knew had developed his own fondness for Nora, seemed to accept that something was developing between them. They were 2 weeks out from Denver when trouble found them. A group of men rode into camp one afternoon, 6 of them, hard-looking characters with guns worn low and eyes that assessed everything like they were calculating its value. Their leader was a thick-set man with a scar running down his left cheek, and he did not bother with pleasantries. "Heard you got a woman traveling with you," he said, looking directly at Tom. "Unusual for a cattle drive." "We have a cook," Tom said evenly, his hand resting casually near his own pistol. "That is all you need to know." "Just seems odd is all," the scarred man continued. "Makes a man wonder if you're running some kind of operation, maybe moving things you should not be moving along with those cattle." Quinn felt anger flare in his chest, understanding immediately that these men were either outlaws looking for an excuse to cause trouble or opportunists hoping to extort some money. He moved closer to where Nora stood near the chuck wagon, positioning himself between her and the strangers. "We are not moving anything but cattle," Tom said, his voice going hard, "and you need to move along before I report you to the territorial marshal." The scarred man laughed. "No law out here, old man. Just what we make ourselves." "Then let me make this clear," Tom said, and suddenly his gun was in his hand, pointed steadily at the leader. Around the camp, Quinn and the other hands had drawn their own weapons, a unified front. "You leave now, peaceful-like, or you leave bleeding. Your choice." For a tense moment, nobody moved. Then the scarred man's eyes narrowed, calculating the odds and apparently not liking them. He held up his hands slowly. "No need for trouble. We will be going." They rode out slowly, but Quinn did not relax until they were out of sight. Tom immediately organized a new watch rotation, doubling up the men and making sure someone was always near the camp. Nora had gone pale during the confrontation, and Quinn found her sitting in the back of the chuck wagon, her hands trembling slightly. "Hey," he said softly, climbing up to sit beside her. "They are gone. You are safe." "I brought this on you," Nora said, her voice tight. "If I were not here, they would have just passed by." "You do not know that," Quinn said firmly. "Men like that are always looking for an angle, for someone to prey on. If it had not been you, they would have tried something else. And Nora, look at me." He waited until she met his eyes. "You belong here. You have earned your place 10 times over. Nobody thinks otherwise." "You could have been hurt," Nora whispered, "all of you, because of me." "We can be hurt any day out here," Quinn said, "and stampede, snakebite, horsefall, you name it. That is the life we chose. But having you here, your cooking, and your company, it has made this drive better for all of us. Do not let some outlaws take that away." Nora leaned against his shoulder, and Quinn put his arm around her, feeling the tension slowly leave her body. They sat like that for a long time, watching the sun set over the plains, neither of them speaking, but both drawing comfort from the other's presence. The incident seemed to shake something loose between them, breaking down the last careful walls they had been maintaining. Over the next few days, they stopped pretending that what was growing between them was just friendship. Quinn held her hand when they walked out to check on the horses. Nora would rest her head on his shoulder during the evening fires. They talked about everything and nothing, building a foundation of understanding and trust. One evening, as they sat alone after the dinner cleanup, Nora said quietly, "I am afraid." "Of what?" Quinn asked. "Of this," she said, gesturing between them. of caring about you so much. I lost my mother when I was young, then my father. Everyone I have loved has left me one way or another. What if something happens to you?" Quinn took both her hands in his. "Nora, I cannot promise that nothing will ever happen to me. Life out here is uncertain, and there are no guarantees. But I can promise that I will be as careful as I can be, and that whatever time we have together, I will make it count." That has to be enough, because the alternative is not living at all. "When did you become so wise?" Nora asked, a small smile breaking through her worry. "Must be your influence," Quinn said, then leaned forward slowly, giving her time to pull away. She did not. Their lips met softly, tentatively at first, then with growing confidence and warmth. When they finally broke apart, both of them were breathing hard, and Quinn felt like his whole world had shifted on its axis. "I love you," he said, the words tumbling out before he could think better of them. "I know it is fast and probably crazy, but I love you, Nora Ashford. I think I started falling in love with you the moment I saw you rationing that bread, so fierce and determined even when you had nothing." Tears shone in Nora's eyes, but she was smiling. "I love you too, Quinn Garrison. You made sure I never had to ration bread again, but more than that, you made me feel like I mattered, like I was worth something. I will never forget that." They kissed again, longer this time, and when they finally drew apart, both of them were grinning like fools. They talked late into the night, making plans and dreaming out loud about the future they could build together. Quinn told her about his dream of owning land, and Nora talked about teaching. And somehow those two separate dreams wove together into something larger and more beautiful than either one alone. "We could have a ranch with a school," Nora said dreamily. "Teach the children of the other ranchers, maybe take in students from town. You work the land and the horses, I teach the children, and we build something lasting." "That sounds perfect," Quinn said, and meant it with his whole heart. They reached the outskirts of Denver 3 weeks later, the herd tired but healthy, the men ready for their pay, and a chance to spend it in the city's saloons and stores. Tom called everyone together for the final accounting, and as he handed out wages, he pulled Quinn and Nora aside. "I have been thinking," the trail boss said gruffly. "I have got another drive starting in 2 months, heading back south. Could use a good segundo if you're interested, Garrison. That is second in command, better pay, more responsibility, and we will need a cook, naturally, if Miss Ashford is willing." Quinn looked at Nora, a question in his eyes. She bit her lip, thinking, then shook her head gently. "Thank you, Mr. Sanders, truly, but I think it is time for me to try teaching again. I am grateful for everything, but my heart is not in cooking professionally. It is in education." "I understand," Tom said with a nod of respect. "You have been the best trail cook I have ever had for what that is worth. You ever need a reference, you come find me." He turned to Quinn. "What about you, son? This is a good opportunity." Quinn felt the pull of it, the security of steady work with a man he respected. But then he looked at Nora, at the hope and dreams shining in her eyes, and he knew what his answer had to be. "I appreciate the offer, Tom, I really do, but I have been thinking it is time to stop drifting and start building. I am going to find some land to buy, start that horse ranch I have been dreaming about, and if I am lucky, I will have a school teacher for a wife to make it a proper home." Tom's weathered face split into a rare grin. "About time you made an honest woman of her. You have my blessing, for what that is worth." Quinn and Nora spent the next week in Denver, staying in a respectable boarding house while Quinn made inquiries about land. What he found was that property near the city was expensive, far beyond his current means, but a land agent told him about opportunities further west, up in the mountains where the mining towns were booming. "Place called Silver Ridge," the agent said, spreading a map across his desk. "New strike 6 months ago, people flooding in, they need everything, supplies, services, schools. Land is cheap because it is remote, but if the mine keeps producing, that town will grow fast. Could be a good opportunity for a young couple starting out." Quinn and Nora took the train west, watching the plains give way to foothills and then to genuine mountains. their peaks still touched with snow even in late summer. Silver Ridge proved to be exactly as advertised, a ramshackle collection of buildings clinging to a steep mountainside with the mine works visible above the town and a constant stream of wagons hauling ore down to the mill. The town did need a school, desperately. The current teacher was an ancient prospector who taught sporadically when he was not too drunk, and whose main qualification seemed to be that he could read. When Nora presented herself to the town council, they practically fell over themselves to offer her the position, along with a small cabin that came with the job. Finding land for Quinn proved almost as easy. A rancher named Harold Chen was looking to sell his property 5 miles outside of town, 100 acres with a stream running through it and decent grazing. He wanted to move closer to his daughter in California, and he was willing to sell at a price Quinn could just barely afford, especially after Harold agreed to accept payment over time. "Young people should have their chance," Harold said as they shook on the deal. "I built something good here. Would like to see it continue." The cabin on the property was small but sturdy, and there was a barn that needed work but had good bones. Quinn threw himself into repairs and improvements while Nora prepared for the start of the school term. They saw each other every few days, maintaining propriety since they were not yet married, though it was the hardest thing Quinn had ever done. Finally, on a crisp October morning, they were married by the town's circuit preacher in a simple ceremony attended by many of Nora's students and their families. Nora wore a dress of soft blue wool that she had sewn herself, and Quinn wore his best shirt and pants, his boots polished to a shine. When the preacher pronounced them man and wife, Quinn kissed his bride in front of God and everybody, not caring who saw the depth of his feelings. The first winter was hard. Quinn worked from dawn until dark, fixing fences, building corrals, making trips down to the lower elevations to buy horses he could train and sell. Nora taught school 5 days a week, then came home to their cabin and worked just as hard, cooking and cleaning and helping with the ranch work whenever she could. They were exhausted most of the time, but they were also happy in a way that went bone deep. On cold nights, they would lie in bed together wrapped in quilts and talk about their plans. Quinn wanted to expand the horse operation, maybe start breeding for specific traits. Nora wanted to grow the school, perhaps add a small library. They both wanted children, eventually, when they felt more settled. Spring brought new challenges and new opportunities. Quinn successfully sold 3 trained horses to one of the mine supervisors, earning enough to buy another 6 untrained animals and to make a substantial payment on the land debt. Nora's school enrollment grew as word spread about her teaching abilities, and the town council voted to pay her a better salary. They also made friends. The Johnsons, who owned the general store, became frequent dinner guests. The Chens, before Harold moved west, taught them valuable lessons about ranching in mountain country. Even some of Quinn's old cowboy friends from the drive passed through occasionally, bringing news and laughter. One evening in early summer, as they sat on their porch watching the sunset paint the mountains gold and purple, Nora placed Quinn's hand on her belly. "I have been meaning to tell you something." Quinn looked at her, his heart suddenly pounding. "What is it?" "You are going to be a father," Nora said softly. "I'm about 3 months along, I think. I wanted to be sure before I told you." Joy exploded through Quinn like fireworks, and he pulled Nora into his arms, holding her as carefully as if she were made of glass. "A baby. We are going to have a baby." "Are you happy?" Nora asked, though she was smiling through tears. "Happy does not even begin to cover it," Quinn said. "Nora, you have given me everything, a purpose, a home, and now a family. I cannot believe how lucky I am." "We both got lucky," Nora said. "The day you rode into Truth or Consequences was the day my life began again. I was so close to giving up, Quinn, so close. And then you appeared, like some kind of answer to a prayer I had not even known how to pray." The baby came in late January during a fierce snowstorm that trapped them in the cabin for 3 days. A midwife from town had agreed to stay with them as Nora's time approached, and it was a good thing she did because the labor was long and difficult. Quinn paced the cabin's small main room, hearing Nora's cries and feeling utterly helpless. But finally, as dawn broke on the 3rd day, he heard a different cry, high and strong and insistent. The midwife opened the bedroom door with a tired smile. "You have a son, Mr. Garrison, and your wife would like to see you." Quinn entered the bedroom to find Nora propped up on pillows, exhausted but radiant, holding a tiny bundle wrapped in blankets. She looked up at him with such love that Quinn felt his throat close with emotion. "Come meet your son," she said softly. Quinn approached slowly, almost afraid, then looked down at the wrinkled red face of his child. The baby had a shock of dark hair and was staring up at him with unfocused eyes, and Quinn felt something fundamental shift inside him. This was his son, his blood, his responsibility, and his joy. "He is perfect," Quinn whispered, reaching out to touch one tiny hand. The baby's fingers closed around his thumb with surprising strength. "What should we name him?" "I was thinking Samuel," Nora said, "after my father, Samuel Garrison." "Samuel," Quinn repeated, testing the name. "I like it. Samuel Garrison, welcome to the world." The years that followed were full in the way that good lives are full, with work and joy and occasional hardship all woven together. The ranch grew slowly but steadily, with Quinn developing a reputation for training horses that were gentle but spirited, perfect for ranch work or family riding. Nora continued teaching, taking a break only for the births of their other children. A daughter came 2 years after Samuel, with Nora's amber eyes and Quinn's sandy hair. They named her Clara, and she was sweet-tempered and curious about everything. Another son followed 3 years later, James, who proved to be as wild and energetic as his older brother was quiet and thoughtful. The little cabin became crowded, so Quinn and some of the neighboring ranchers worked together to build an addition, then eventually a whole new house with proper bedrooms and a large kitchen where Nora could cook the family meals she had never had growing up. There was a porch that wrapped around 3 sides, perfect for summer evenings, and a fireplace big enough to keep them all warm in winter. The school grew too, until Nora had an assistant teacher and over 30 students. True to her dreams, she started a small library soliciting book donations from families and even from mining companies who wanted to support education. Children from miles around came to learn reading and arithmetic and history from Mrs. Garrison, who was known to be strict but fair, demanding but caring. Quinn and Nora's marriage deepened with time, weathering the storms that all relationships face. There were arguments about money and child rearing and whose turn it was to deal with various crises. There were moments of frustration and exhaustion and doubt. But there were far more moments of connection and laughter and love, of working together towards shared goals and supporting each other through difficulties. One of their biggest challenges came when Samuel was 10 and decided he wanted to go live with his uncle in Denver to attend a better school. Nora wanted to let him go, to give him opportunities they could not provide in Silver Ridge. Quinn wanted to keep his son close, to teach him the ranch work and ensure the family legacy continued. They argued about it for weeks, both of them hurt and stubborn, until finally Clara, 8 years old and wise beyond her years, told them they were being silly. "Samuel should get to choose," she declared at dinner one night. "It is his life, is it not?" Quinn and Nora had looked at each other, chastened, and called Samuel in to ask him what he truly wanted. As it turned out, he wanted to stay, not because of the ranch, but because he loved teaching the younger children their letters and wanted to become a teacher like his mother. That realization led to a new dream. Samuel could go to Denver for high school and teachers' college, then return to take over the school when Nora was ready to retire. It was a plan that satisfied everyone, and it taught Quinn an important lesson about holding things loosely, about trusting the people you love to make their own choices. He shared this insight with Nora one night as they lay in bed, their children finally asleep after a chaotic dinner and evening. "You were right about Samuel," he admitted. "I was trying to hold on too tight." "We both were, in different ways," Nora said generously. "We just wanted what was best for him. The trick is figuring out that what is best might not be what we first imagined." "When did we get so old and wise?" Quinn asked with a laugh. "We are not old," Nora protested. We are just seasoned. Is that what we are calling it? Quinn pulled her closer, still marveling after all these years at how perfectly she fit against him. Nora Garrison, I love you more today than I did the day we married. And I loved you plenty then. I love you too, Nora whispered. You made sure I never had to ration bread again, Quinn. But more than that, you gave me a life of abundance. Not just material things, though we have been blessed with those, but abundance of love, of purpose, of family that is worth more than all the gold in these mountains. As the children grew older, the ranch and the school continued to thrive. Silver Ridge itself evolved from a rough mining camp into a proper town, with churches and a newspaper and even a small hospital. Quinn served on the town council for several years, using his position to advocate for good roads and fair treatment of the Chinese laborers who worked the mines and lived on the outskirts of town. Nora became involved in efforts to establish a library and a women's society that provided assistance to families in need. She never forgot her own desperate days in Truth or Consequences, and she was passionate about ensuring that nobody in Silver Ridge went hungry if it could be prevented. She organized food drives and taught cooking classes to help families stretch their budgets, and she quietly paid school fees for children whose families could not afford them. Samuel did eventually go to Denver for his education, returning 4 years later as a certified teacher with new ideas about pedagogy and a determination to make Silver Ridge's school one of the best in the territory. He courted and married the daughter of one of the mine owners, a sensible young woman named Beth, who loved teaching almost as much as he did. Clara proved to have inherited her father's way with horses, and she worked alongside Quinn on the ranch until she too married, choosing a young veterinarian who had set up practice in town. They built a house on the far corner of the property, and Clara continued to help with the horses even as she started her own family. James, the youngest and wildest, decided at age 16 that he wanted to join the army, giving his parents matching gray hairs. But he survived his service and returned home with stories and a maturity he had lacked before, ready to fully commit to the ranch work. He eventually took over the day-to-day operations, allowing Quinn to slowly step back and enjoy a well-earned rest. The years passed, marked by births and deaths, triumphs and setbacks, the steady accumulation of a life well lived. Quinn's hair went fully gray, then white. Nora needed spectacles for her reading and close work. Their bodies grew older and slower, but their love remained steady and true, a constant in a changing world. They celebrated their 25th wedding anniversary with a party that seemed to involve half the town. Their children and grandchildren gathered, along with neighbors and old friends. Even Pete, the cowhand from the cattle drive, showed up, now running his own small operation in Wyoming and still unmarried despite being in his 60s. Never found anyone who measured up to you, Mrs. Garrison, he told Nora with a wink, and she had blushed and swatted his arm like she was still the young woman in the cattle camp. Tom Sanders had passed away a few years earlier, but his daughter sent a letter of congratulation, reminiscing about the time her father had told her about the cowboy who brought a starving woman into camp and changed both their lives. The letter made both Quinn and Nora cry happy tears. As they stood together that evening, watching their grandchildren play while their adult children laughed and reminisced, Quinn pulled Nora close and pressed a kiss to her silver-streaked hair. You know what I remember most from that first day? Your hands, how carefully you were dividing that bread. You treated those crumbs like they were the most precious thing in the world because they were all you had. That broke my heart and made it sore at the same time. And I remember thinking that you must be some kind of fool or angel offering to buy dinner for a complete stranger, Nora said. But you were neither. You were just a good man with a kind heart. And I was lucky enough to be in the right place at the right time for that to matter. We were both lucky, Quinn corrected gently. We found each other when we both needed finding. Their oldest grandchild, Samuel's son Henry, ran up to them at that moment, his face flushed with excitement. Grandpa, Grandma, can you tell us the story again? About how you met? Please? Quinn and Nora exchanged amused glances. Their grandchildren never tired of hearing about the cattle drive and the courtship that had led to all of them existing. All right, Quinn agreed, settling into a chair with Nora beside him. But you have heard this story 100 times. It does not matter, Henry insisted. It is the best story. So Quinn began, with Nora filling in details he forgot or correcting his memory when he embellished too much. They told about truth or consequences and the bread rationing, about the cattle drive and the chuck wagon, about outlaws and mountain winters and building something from nothing. They told about love finding two people who had nothing but each other and deciding that was enough to build a whole world. The children listened with rapt attention, even though they knew every word, because some stories are worth hearing over and over. They are the stories that remind us who we are and where we came from. The stories that teach us about courage and kindness and the transformative power of love. Later that night, after the guests had gone home and the grandchildren had been bedded down in various corners of the house, Quinn and Nora walked slowly up to the old cabin, which they had kept and maintained as a kind of shrine to their beginnings. They sat on its small porch, looking out at the starlit mountains, holding hands like they had when they were young. "Do you have any regrets?" Nora asked quietly. Quinn thought about this seriously because Nora deserved a serious answer. "I regret that we could not have more time," he said finally. "I regret the days I was too tired or too busy to tell you properly how much I loved you. But the big things, the important choices, no. I do not regret any of those. You?" "No regrets," Nora said firmly. "Not a one. My life before you was a prelude, a preparation for what came after. You saved me, Quinn, not just from starvation, though you did that too. You saved me from a life of desperation and despair. You gave me hope when I had none left, and you gave me love when I thought I was unworthy of it." "You were always worthy," Quinn said fiercely. "Always, from the very first moment." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, listening to the night sounds and feeling the cool mountain breeze. Finally, Nora said, "We should get back. The children will worry if we are gone too long." "Let them worry for a few more minutes," Quinn said, not ready to break the spell of this perfect moment. "I want to sit here with my wife and count my blessings." "We do have a lot of them," Nora agreed, leaning her head on his shoulder. They remained like that as the stars wheeled overhead and the night deepened around them, two people who had found each other against all odds and built a life that mattered. They had started with nothing but a piece of rationed bread and a cowboy's kindness, and they had created something beautiful and lasting. The ranch would continue after them, passed down through generations. The school would educate hundreds more children. Their love story would be told and retold, becoming part of family legend. But in that moment, none of that mattered as much as the simple fact of being together. Two souls joined in the great adventure of building a life. Quinn thought back to that hot July day in Truth or Consequences, to the choice he had made to stop and help instead of riding on by. It was such a small decision in the moment, requiring nothing more than basic human decency. But from that small seed had grown everything that mattered. His wife, his children, his home, his purpose. It had all started with seeing someone in need and choosing to care. "Thank you," he said suddenly. "For what?" Nora asked, lifting her head to look at him in the starlight. "For being willing to trust me that first day, for taking a chance on a cowboy you did not know, for building this life with me, for loving me all these years. Just thank you for all of it." Nora's eyes glistened with tears, but she was smiling. "Thank you for seeing me when I was invisible. Thank you for treating me with dignity when I had nothing. Thank you for every day since then. I love you, Quinn Garrison. I will love you until my last breath and beyond." They kissed then. A kiss that held decades of devotion and intimacy, of shared sorrows and multiplied joys. When they finally stood to return to the main house, they walked hand in hand like newlyweds, their steps slower but their hearts just as full as they had been on that long-ago wedding day. The years continued to pass with increasing speed. Their grandchildren grew and had children of their own. The ranch expanded to include 200 acres. The school added a second building. Silver Ridge transformed into a small city as the mines played out, but other industries took their place. Through it all, Quinn and Nora remained at the center of their family, the foundation upon which everything else was built. They celebrated 50th and then 55th wedding anniversaries, each one a testament to the enduring power of the love they had built together. As Quinn approached his 80th birthday, his health began to fail. His heart, which had been so strong for so many years, began to weaken. The doctor said there was nothing to be done, that he had lived a good long life and should prepare himself for the end. Quinn accepted this news with equanimity, his only real sorrow being that he would have to leave Nora behind. "You have to promise me something," he told her one evening, as they sat together in the bedroom they had shared for more than 50 years. "You have to promise me that you will be all right, that you will let the children take care of you, that you will keep teaching as long as you are able, that you will not give up on life just because I am gone." "That is a lot of promises," Nora said, her voice thick with unshed tears. "I am not sure I can keep them all." "Try," Quinn urged, taking her hand. "For me. I need to know that you will be all right." "I will try," Nora promised, though they both knew how hard it would be. Quinn passed away peacefully 3 weeks later, on a spring morning when the mountains were green with new growth and the air smelled of possibility. He died in his own bed, surrounded by his children and grandchildren, with Nora holding his hand. His last words were, "I love you," directed at his wife of 57 years, and his last expression was one of peace. The funeral was one of the largest Silver Ridge had ever seen, with people coming from 3 states to pay their respects to Quinn Garrison, the horseman, the rancher, the husband, the father, the friend. They told stories of his fairness and his kindness, his hard work, and his integrity. They spoke of a life well lived and a legacy that would endure. Nora stood through it all with dry eyes and a straight back, drawing strength from her children and grandchildren. But that night, alone in the big house that suddenly felt empty, she finally allowed herself to break down. She cried for the loss of her partner, her love, her best friend. She cried for all the tomorrows they would not share, for all the sunsets she would watch alone, for the phantom warmth of his hand in hers. But she also remembered her promise. Quinn had made sure she never had to ration bread again, had given her a life of abundance and love. She owed it to him and to herself to honor that gift by continuing to live fully. So Nora dried her tears and got up the next morning and went on. She continued teaching for another 3 years, finally retiring at age 82. She spent time with her great-grandchildren, passing on stories and wisdom. She wrote down the full history of her and Quinn's life together, wanting future generations to know where they came from and what their ancestors had built. She lived to see the turn of the century, marveling at automobiles and electric lights and all the changes sweeping through the world. She lived to see Samuel's son become the superintendent of schools for the entire county. She lived to see James's daughter turn the ranch into one of the premier horse breeding operations in Colorado. On a warm summer evening 5 years after Quinn's death, Nora passed away quietly in her sleep. She was 85 years old, and she died in the same bed where Quinn had died, as though she had been patiently waiting her turn to join him. At her funeral, her great-grandson read from the memoir she had written, the story of a starving woman in an alley and a cowboy who could not ride by without stopping. He read about love that transformed 2 desperate people into partners, about how one act of kindness rippled outward to create multiple generations of life and love. There was not a dry eye in the church. They buried Nora next to Quinn in the cemetery on the hill overlooking the ranch they had built together. The headstone was simple: Quinn and Nora Garrison, partners in life, united in eternity. He made sure she never had to ration bread again. Their children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren stood around the grave, hands linked, forming a chain that stretched back to that hot day in Truth or Consequences and forward into an unknowable future. They were the legacy, the proof that love could build something lasting, that kindness could change the world, that two people with nothing but each other could create abundance beyond measure. The ranch continued for generations, eventually becoming a historic site that drew visitors from across the country. The school was renamed Garrison Elementary in honor of Nora and her decades of service. Their story was written up in history books as an example of pioneer resilience and romance. But for their descendants, it was always more personal than that. It was the story of how they all came to be, the foundational narrative that explained who they were and what they valued. It was the story of a cowboy who saw a woman rationing bread and decided to do something about it, not knowing that his simple act of compassion would echo through time, creating life and love for generations yet unborn. And somewhere, in whatever lies beyond this life, Quinn and Nora Garrison were together again, walking hand in hand through fields of gold, their love undiminished by death, their story complete and perfect and eternal. They had started with nothing and built everything that mattered. They had loved fiercely and worked hard and raised a family that carried their values forward into the world. They had lived lives of purpose and meaning. And in the end, that was the greatest success of all. The bread that Nora had rationed so carefully in that dusty alley became a symbol for their entire story, a reminder that sustenance comes in many forms. Quinn had fed her body that first day, but over the years they had fed each other's souls, nourishing each other through all the challenges and joys of life. Together they had created a feast from crumbs, a banquet from scraps, a legacy from love. And that legacy would endure as long as there were people to remember their names and tell their story. The story of the cowboy who found her rationing bread and made sure she never had to ration again.